kindergarten? Those were good days, weren't they? Like, let's just be honest with each other. Kindergarten was awesome. You didn't have to pay bills. Someone fed you all the time. And there was nap time in the middle of the day. Can you imagine how much you'd love your job if your employer said, hey, it's nap time, everybody. Close your eyes, put your heads down on your desk. That would be amazing. But you know what my favorite part of kindergarten was? Hands down. It was the day where the teacher announced that the next day was show and tell day. Remember show and tell? Some of us loved it because we got to show off our stuff. Some of us hated it because someone else was showing off theirs. But either way, people would show up with boxes like this, right? And inside the box was something that they were really, really proud of. Like it might have been their favorite book. And the teacher would go, oh, that's a great book. Why don't you read a couple pages to us? And they would go on through, their favorite part of whatever book. Or just after Christmas, right? Now remember kindergarten, someone brings their cool new cement truck and everybody oohs and ahs and they tell you all about it. Who gave it to them, what time it was when they opened it, what the wrapping paper looked like the nitty gritty detail about this gift. On and on and on and they go. Or there was always that kid that got to go to Disney World over break. And they would bring some Mickey Mouse thing and you were like, man, I wish I was one of them. Like I wish I could be in their family. Right? And people bring all kinds of stuff. The dad's mug, ties, all kinds of stuff shows up for show and tell. But here's what I remember from kindergarten, and maybe you were better than me, but I did not care about the tell part. Like I didn't bother myself with those details. I just wanted to hold what they were showing me. I just wanted to see it for myself, get it in my hands, right? Everybody only wanted the showpiece. This is especially true, like I got to bring my puppy once to kindergarten, and nobody cared about what I had to say about that dog. They just wanted to pet the dog, right? Or if you brought your parents, because your parent had a cool, American Rescue Hero job where they were firemen and they were whatever, and they'd come and nobody cared about what you had to say about your dad or your mom. They just wanted to talk to your mom or your dad. They just loved the show piece. The tell piece did not matter. Now here's what's interesting. The older we've gotten, the more we've learned about how God wired us, how God made us, and why that seems to be the case. Did you know that 65% of the population is a visual learner? 65%. The majority of people learn best by seeing something, not hearing something. And by the way, it's not that the other 35% are all audible learners. A lot of them are kinesthetic learners. They touch. So most of us do not learn best by being talked at. We learn best by seeing something, by touching something, by holding something. And what's interesting is that your brain can process pictures 60,000 times faster than text. 60,000 times. I can't even fathom that. But you can look at a picture, process it way faster than you can reading. And all of the students in the room are like, will you please come tell my teacher in my lit class what that is all about, right? We live in a day and age where we don't read as much, we watch more. And some of us feel like that's evil and that's wrong and our society is falling apart, but maybe it's just because we're leaning into how we're wired a little bit more. Did you know that of all the nerve endings that are connected to your brain, 40% of them are connected to retina? Seeing, your eyes. We want to see things instead of be told things. So what would happen if Christians got that? What would happen if us Christ followers understood that the people that we're trying to reach, the majority of them learn best by seeing, not hearing? Why is it that Christendom at large has settled for, we're just going to tell them what we believe? And we will argue with them, and we will go back and forth with them, and we'll get heated with them, and we'll try and be louder than them, and we're just going to tell. And everybody around us is going, Can you show me what you believe? This is why most people, when they hear Christian, they see hypocrite. Because we are really good at talking a great game, not so good at actually playing the game. Not so good at actually doing. And I'm not saying this about you. I'm definitely saying it about me. I mean, I'm like a professional Christian talker. So this is a little unsettling for me. Because this is relatively ineffective. You know how you would learn best? Is if you came and lived with me for a while. You don't want to, but you'd certainly learn a little bit more about what I believe because you'd see it, which would work way better than me just telling you all the time, because this is how people are wired. So what if, instead of trying to reject it and try and hold it off at arm's length, we just embrace the fact that this is how God made us, and what if we altered the way that we are doing things so that instead of people hearing us like we're a teacher from Peanuts, wah, 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 they start looking at us and see something that we believe? What if we became determined to not tell someone a what, but show them a who? What if instead of making sure that we had to know all the right words and all the right order and all of that kind of stuff, talking sorts of things, we just focused on how do I be the person that I say I am so that other people see whose I am? What if we did that? I want to argue today that that's what a lot of the Old Testament stories you and I grew up hearing in Sunday school, or your grandparents maybe told you when you would sleep over at their house, like that was the deal. You got a cupcake if you listened to a Bible story, right? I'm going to make the argument that that's what all of those stories are really all about, encouraging you and me to do the things that we say we're all about rather than talk about the things we say we're all about. And there's one story in particular that I think illuminates this for us in such an incredible way. If the names Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego mean anything to you, you should be excited, because that's what we're talking about today. These were three guys that had one really hot day because of what they believed. But what I want to do is go real slow through this and examine how it all goes down, because how it all goes down shows us how it should go down for us. So if you go to Daniel chapter 3, you're going to read about this king, and the king's name is Nebuchadnezzar. It's like the longest name ever. And he is in charge of all these different provinces, one of which is Israel, and the people report to him, and he's very full of himself. And by the way, as we get into this, it's going to be really easy to look at Nebuchadnezzar as the villain. I think what we should do is look at Nebuchadnezzar as the us, because he thinks out loud what we think on the inside. Nebuchadnezzar is this king that wants to make sure that everybody knows he's king and that he's very powerful and very scary and very intimidating. And so what he does is he erects this huge, huge statue that's gold-plated, and he announces that every once in a while, like daily, music is going to start playing. And when the music starts playing, everybody in the land needs to bow down and worship this statue. And if you don't, if you refuse, we're going to literally cook you. This is brutal and scary. Now, here's what's interesting, is that in the king's employ, one of the people that work for him, three in fact, are Jewish. And Jewish people grow up with this thing stuck in their head, one of 10 big commandments that says you shouldn't have any other gods except me, don't worship any idols. And so when the king says, hey, you should bow down and worship this idol, they say, And so some of the king's henchmen come running in and they say, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these three guys that work for you, they're refusing to worship the way that you told them to. This is what they say specifically. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Now, if you go back and read that again, you realize quickly that this is ultimately about one person. And it's not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. it's Nebuchadnezzar. Because what do they say to him? They say they're paying no attention to you. Not your God, not your idol, you. They are offending you. They are rejecting you. They're saying you are not as powerful, as big, as great as their God, which you can't see or touch or smell or anything like that. And so the king is in this place where he's got to do what he said he was going to do. And so he calls Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the court or whatever, and he gives them an ultimatum. And unlike what Nebuchadnezzar would usually do, he gives them another chance, just in case he could convince them to save themselves. This is what he says. He says, I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? My power. Not my God's power, not my statue's power, not my army's power, my power. You see, what's happening here is Nebuchadnezzar is pitting himself against the God of Israel, the God that you and I worship today. And he's saying that he, or any God, doesn't stand a chance against me. This is all about me. And like I said, we're quick to go, what a bad guy. But all Nebuchadnezzar is an unfiltered, untethered us. Because human pride always goes to one end. And funny enough, it sounds just like what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are standing on. Human pride, untethered, unfiltered, fully realized, comes down to this. You should have no other gods except me. This is what sin and it ultimately and generally is. It's us wanting the throne, not allowing God to have the throne. Us being in charge of our own lives instead of God being in charge of our lives. So Nebuchadnezzar says, you shouldn't have any other God except me. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going, we shouldn't have any other gods but him. And so we're at this impasse. And in the end, this is a who versus who. It's just not the who that everybody thought it would be. It's not these three guys against the king. It's the king against their God. Now, I don't know how you would have responded. Maybe you took the initial stand, but then when you're brought before the king, I'm just going to be honest, I would be terrified. Knees knocking, borderline needing another pair of pants, right? Like you're terrified. It's not like you're meeting a benevolent, kind king. You're meeting Nebuchadnezzar, who doesn't care if you live or die. And he says, hey, you either bow down and worship this statue or you're toast. But listen to how these guys respond to him. It's amazing. They say, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. Pardon me? This is me talking to them? Yeah, you do. You do need to defend yourself. Like, I can't believe that their response is, we're not going to defend ourselves. You know what I would have done? Is there a flip chart somewhere that I could borrow? Nice, heavy-smelling marker so that I can draw some things up here and prove to Nebuchadnezzar real quick that my God is God and that I shouldn't die. And does anybody have a copy of the Jewish scriptures that I can show him and outline for him so that he would understand that I'm right and he's wrong? That's what I would do. But these guys, they say, no, we're not going to say anything. We don't need to defend ourselves against you. Because God is God. And God will take care of himself. That's exactly what they say as they continue on. They say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Notice who they're talking about. They're not talking about themselves. They don't go to say, hey, just so you know, Nebuchadnezzar, we've watched MacGyver. and we're going to get ourselves out of this, and we're really resourceful and smart. No, that's not the argument. The argument is, hey, we're not going to defend ourselves because this is about God, and God rescues us. And we'll let him do the talking. Better said, we'll let him do the showing. We'll let him show you who he is, because that's way more effective. That's way more helpful than me telling you who he is. But here's what's interesting is they're not done yet. They make sure that he understands this is all about their God, not them. But then they do what we might argue a good, faithful Christian would never do, and give God an out. This is what they say next. But even if he doesn't, lack of faith, right? Like, isn't that what you would think? Like, let's be honest with each other. If he doesn't, what do you mean? That's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say he's gonna, and if you just have big faith, then God will deliver because he has to if you have big faith. They said, but even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue. This is what they're doing. They're making the argument so much about God and not themselves, so much about showing and not telling, that they remove what I'm going to call quid pro quo religion. Here's what quid pro quo means. Favor for a favor. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I do this, you do that. And so this is how it would look. We stood up for God, we didn't worship the statue, so he then is obligated to save us. This is how a lot of us work. It's how I've worked almost all my life. Hey, God, if I serve you faithfully, you'll make my life easy, right? God, if I get up there and preach a really great message, you'll make sure that we don't have any road bumps this week at home, right? Like, you won't make me deal with what I'm telling everybody else to deal with, right? It's this idea that I'm going to do something for you, so you have to do something for me. But these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they go, this is not how God works. We're going to stand on his promises. We're going to stand up for who he is, regardless of what he does for us, because it's not so much about what he does, it's about who he is. And what would it look like if you and I lived every day without quid pro quo religion? We just serve Jesus because he is Jesus, not because he's going to make our life better or make our problems go away. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, listen, we're not going to bow down, so you can go ahead and throw us in the furnace. We hope God will rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we're not changing our minds. It's an amazing moment. And so in the next few verses, you know how the story goes. They refuse, so they get bound up. And so you can read along later, but they tie them up so that they can't wiggle out or fight their captors as they're brought to the furnace, and they get thrown into the furnace. Now, the furnace was used for baking bricks, likely, and so it was really, really hot, and odds are Nebuchadnezzar had it heated up. It says it was heated up higher than usual. And so these soldiers that take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and go to throw them into the fire, and I don't know how it works. I'm trying to get this picture in my head. All we know for sure is that the fire is so hot that the soldiers throwing them into the fire die. So what we're about to read is not like, well, maybe it was only 100 degrees in there. No, these people died on the spot because the fire was literally so hot. But then something amazing happens, and God shows up. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement. I imagine a nice big throne front and center to the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar slouched down, real cool and powerful like, sneering and smiling, and all of a sudden he sees something that his brain can't fully comprehend. He exclaims to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did." They replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god." Try and get your head around this. 30 seconds ago, the guys throwing them into the fire, not the ones getting into the fire, throwing them into the fire, they die. So the fact that these three that just were thrown in are walking around, now they're unbound because the ropes burned away, but they seem to be okay. And Nebuchadnezzar notices there's one extra person. Now here's what's so cool about this. This is what makes this story so mind-boggling to me. This is what's called a Christophany in the Old Testament. Now here's what that means. It is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus himself. I'm going to let that sit there a minute. Before Jesus becomes human, born in the manger, he shows up in the fire. This is mind-boggling to me. Old Testament scholars, New Testament scholars alike, they all go, Jesus showed up. And he's just chatting it up with them. And can you imagine what the conversation was like? Abednego is like, is it hot in here? Just chatting. Now here's what's amazing. This fourth man, the fourth person, the one they didn't throw in there, the one that's just showed up, I believe Jesus himself becomes the center of attention. Because did you notice Nebuchadnezzar did not sit there, see it, and go, weren't those guys talking about being rescued? He doesn't go, that argument they made and the scriptures they showed me, I'm kind of convinced by that now. He's not asking what did they say. He's asking, who is that? Who is that? In the middle of the fire, in the middle of this trial for these guys, who is this that's shown up out of nowhere? Who is this that's freed them and allowed them to walk around when everybody else is dying, they seem to have life? Who is that? And it's that who that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have shown Nebuchadnezzar. It's that who that Daniel has shown Nebuchadnezzar. Over and over again, it's the who that makes the difference. You see, here's what's so amazing about this story. The heroes of the story are not named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The hero of this story is Jesus. And the point of this story is not the miracle. We've gotten this wrong. We always love to talk about the fire, but the real miracle of this story is not that the guys get removed from the fire and they don't even smell like smoke, which that's the report, by the way. The miracle is that this hard-hearted, murderous, evil king is changed forever. Just listen to what he says. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Not praise them. Not praise Daniel, their friend. Praise the God of them. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. And then when you jump into chapter 4, you read a little bit more of what God is doing in the heart of this king who most would have assumed is beyond redeemable, beyond hope, beyond help. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and glorify and honor the King of heaven. All his acts are just and true, and he is able to humble the proud. And you might put in parentheses there, Nebuchadnezzar, of which I am the most. I was the most proud. I was the one that declared all people should have no other God except me. And yet God shows up and humbled me. And I realized that this was not a competition between some statue I built and some invisible God that these three Jews worship. The competition was really no competition. It was a rescue mission. And Jesus shows up, God shows up in this moment. And instead of everybody oohing and ahhing about a statue, instead of everybody oohing and ahhing about three guys in a furnace, they're amazed at the God of the guys in the furnace. And what changed Nebuchadnezzar was not an argument because they didn't make one. They didn't defend themselves. They displayed one. And if you ask me, Display eats dialogue for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You've maybe heard that said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's business thinking, and I think it's true, but I want us to start thinking this way. Us displaying who Jesus is will outdo what we say about Jesus every time. And conversely, what we don't do about Jesus will undo what we say about Jesus every time. You want to reach the people in your life? If I want to reach the people in my life, it's probably not going to happen by quoting a bunch of scripture to them over and over again that they've already heard. Because you know the question they're asking? It's not, where is that verse found in the Bible? It's, where is that verse found in your life? Where do I get to see this lived out in you? Because you know what could have happened? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have stood up before the king, made a great argument, outlined it, and it would have been irrefutable because they were really intelligent guys. And they would have said, and we're going to bow down just so that you don't kill us. And Nebuchadnezzar would have gone, that's some God you serve, that you're willing to give up on him that easily. You see, display will outpace what you say all day long. And the church, us Christians, we need to stop settling for talking all the time. We have talked people to death, and all of them are going, can you show me? Because I'm a visual learner. And I want to see it. I want to see it. So, don't tell them a what. Show them a who. When you are thrust into the trials in your life, you and I need to figure out a way to make sure that when people look into that trouble, they see Jesus. Because the reality is, as unfortunate as it is that we all have some furnace that we're in right now, don't we? We all have some fire that we've been thrown into. And I don't know what that furnace looks like for you, but we could go around this room and I could ask you, what's your furnace? And 100% of you would have an answer. You might say it was my job that I lost, or this job change that I'm facing. It could be my mom or my dad passed away this last week. It could be I'm not talking to my spouse, or I'm not talking to my kids. It could be I have crushing loneliness and despair. It could be I'm getting to an age where I'm looking back on my life and I'm not sure what I've done with it. You fill in the blank, but my guess is we're all there. And I believe what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's story is all about is that you don't have to be there by yourself. You don't have to face that alone. If Jesus is willing to show up before he's born, he's willing to show up in yours. And you don't have to face any of that purposelessly. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I believe this, when they died eventually, and they're all sitting around and they're going, hey, do you remember that one time we got thrown into the furnace? None of them went, why do you think God allowed that to happen? They all went, we know. For him, Nebuchadnezzar. Our trial was not in vain. Our trial was not pointless. God used it to do something incredible. He used me to display God. And everything changed from there. And in case you need proof that you are not alone in your trial, the last thing Jesus said to his disciples, like his parting words. Now, you and I know your parting words are always the most important words. It's like, if you don't hear me say anything else, it's this thing, because this is the last thing I'm going to say to you. This is what Jesus said. Be sure of this. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. There is no place that you will go where I am not. There is no challenge that you will face that I don't walk with you into. There is no moment, no feeling that is just accidental. And you don't have to navigate it alone. What I want you to understand is that your challenges, your life in general, the good stuff, the bad stuff, and everything in between, has a singular purpose as a Christian. It's so that others will see the who beyond you. You see, what made the difference in this story was not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was the fourth person in the fire. And so what if we began to live our lives and understand our relationships as an opportunity for other people to see who Jesus is? Now, if you're like me, you're going, time out. This sounds really good, but last time I went through a hard time, Jesus didn't show up physically. Like, I might believe in my head that he's with me, but I didn't get to lean over and like put my arm around Jesus, or him put his arm around me and go, it's all okay. Right? Like, I didn't get the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego treatment. So how do I display who Jesus is? How do I show people who Jesus is? How do I let them see him in my life? Well, Paul would say, who wrote like most of the New Testament, he would say, love. That's how you show people. You have one obligation. No matter what season of life you're in, no matter what challenge you're in, it's love them. Love each other. That's what's going to make the difference. It's what made the difference in Paul's life itself. Remember Peter? Peter, the guy that like walked on water for a few steps. Peter, the guy that denied who Jesus was. Peter, the guy that I just love because he's so human. He said, you want to display who Jesus is? Love each other. Like, love each other really, really well. And then there's James, and I'll say this every time I mention James. James is the brother of Jesus. What would your sibling have to do to convince you that they were your Lord? A lot of us are going to spend the rest of our day thinking about that. But James, who knew Jesus, like intimately since they were little kids, he said, love your neighbor. That's how you show people who Jesus is, because that's who Jesus was. And you know where James and Peter and Paul got that idea? The idea of what it means to display who Jesus is? Well, they got that from Jesus, because they walked with him. And so this is what Jesus says. He says, now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other, just as I've loved you, which led to a cross. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. You want people to see Jesus, they'll see it in your relationships with the person sitting next to you. They'll see it in the way that you treat them when you see them in the store or walking their dog on the sidewalk. Jesus says the way that people will see me, will know that you are my disciple, is in the way that you love. So even in the furnace, love well, because that's how they'll find me. Even when you're having a bad day, love well, because that's how they'll find me. Your job is not to tell them a what, it's to show them a who. And the only way to show them that who is by action, by loving the way that Jesus loved. And here's how Paul put it. This is what love is that even while we were still sinners, even while we were still missing the mark, Jesus came for you, loved you, died for you. This is the model that we were given by which to live our lives. So maybe, just maybe, instead of calling it show and tell, we should call it show, then tell. Show them first. Show them who Jesus is first. And you know what might happen? They might go, who is that? Who's that in your life that's making you unlike anybody else that I know? That makes you treat me like nobody else I know? Who is that? Let me tell you. It's the model Jesus gave, right? When he meets the Samaritan who Jews were repulsed by, And he's talking to her. He talks to her for a long, long time before he says anything about go and sin no more. He shows her first who he is. And then she invites him to tell her. So what if we did the same? Those people that you've been praying for, those people that you've been talking with or arguing with, all of a sudden they might go, it's real. It's real. So I want to give you one final visual to help you understand a couple things. Number one, sometimes it's very, very scary to take a leap and live by faith. To trust that God is going to carry you through your challenge, your opportunity to show someone who he is. That can be really, really scary. But doing it might actually be the thing that makes all the difference. Showing it instead of telling it might change everything. So I could stand up here for the next 90 seconds and tell you all about this girl that put on a rock climbing harness and tied a rope to it, and the other end of the rope was tied to another rope way out in the middle of a canyon. And on the count of 3, she ran and jumped off the cliff. I could tell you all about that, or I could show you. And my guess is, in showing you, instead of just thinking about what I said, the story I told you, you're going to feel it. You're going to experience it for yourself. Take a look.
No other females jumped from here, have they?
No. I mean, you know it's going to be scary, but you know you're going to be okay, and that's all that matters, is that you will be okay.
You know, most girlfriends don't have to have this talk with their boyfriends.
Okay. It's all you, honey.
Don't leave yet.
Okay. Okay. You don't have to jump if you don't want to.
I don't know if I want to.
But you know, this will be the coolest single experience of your life.
I know, this is also the scariest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Oh no, Devin! Not yet, not yet. Hold on.
Oh, you have to respect the countdown.
5.
I'm not gonna jump. I don't know if I can jump.
I'll count down to 0. If you choose not to jump, I'm totally fine with you not jumping. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Come on, Randy,
You can! You can!
You are so
hardcore!
hardcore!
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
I can do this. Honey, I don't think I can do it.
3, 2, 1, 0.
I can't do it.
2, 1, 0.
I can't do it.
Honey, you can! You can! You can!
I can't do
You
it.
can!
2, 1, 0.
I think I can do it. Maybe somebody else should just go.
2, 1, 0.
I can't do it.
2, 1, 0.
I don't even want to jump.
2, 1, 0.
I don't want to do it.
3, 2, 1, 0.
I don't want to do it.
Put the other hand on the rope.
I know I don't.
Take a 6-inch step to the right. Just not right there on the edge. Just like that.
Honey, I don't want to do it.
Put the 2 hands on the rope. You know I love you, right?
No, please don't push me off. Please don't.
I am not. I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to push you. But if you stand here for more than 10 more seconds, I will. 3, 2.
Honey,
What'd you say?
I just got dumped. Was it worth it? It will be worth it. Someday she'll thank me. So can I have her number?
Is anybody else having heart palpitations right now? Like really, really difficult to watch, right? Because you're watching it. You didn't care about that story when I told you about it. But when I showed you, took it to a whole new level. And here's what's amazing. You want to guess how many times that video has been watched on YouTube? 22 million times. So she showed us, and everybody else told everybody else. And you and I are invited to do something similar. Now, reality is we aren't going to likely take that leap on our own. We might need a push. And that's the beauty of community. That's the beauty of being part of something like this, is that God doesn't ask us to do any of it by ourselves. And so I want to encourage you with one quick thing, and that's this. If you are not connected to a group, you should be connected to a group. Not so that we can have a higher number, but so that you can start to display who God is in your life and have people there to cheer you on and to reassure you as you go.